It was the perfect wedding, the kind of celebration that seemed blessed by the gods themselves. The guests gathered in a sun-dappled clearing, surrounded by trees and the sweet scent of flowers. They marveled at the couple before them. The groom, Orpheus, was famed throughout the world as the greatest of all poets and musicians. His songs could charm even the wildest of beasts, and his melodies had the power to move both gods and mortals alike. The bride, Eurydice, was a beautiful wood nymph, a spirit of nature, and anyone who saw her could tell that her love for Orpheus was as deep and true as his love for her. Their bond was undeniable, and those who witnessed their union felt privileged to be in the presence of such a love. As Orpheus and Eurydice exchanged their vows, their joy was palpable. Their hearts were intertwined, and it seemed that nothing in the world could ever come between them. But fate, as it often does in the stories of the ancient Greeks, had other plans. Just as the couple began to celebrate their new life together, a tragic accident struck. Eurydice stumbled as she danced through the meadow, her laughter suddenly silenced as she fell to the ground. Orpheus rushed to her side, but by the time he reached her, it was too late. Eurydice was dead. A deadly serpent had bitten her, and the snake slithered away through the grass, leaving Orpheus to cradle his beloved's lifeless body. The world seemed to stop. The vibrant joy of the wedding day dissolved into sorrow as Orpheus realized the depth of his loss. His heart shattered, and the weight of his grief was more than the human world could bear. He could not accept that Eurydice was gone forever, taken from him so cruelly and so soon. Desperate, Orpheus made a fateful decision. He would journey to the land of the dead, a place no living creature had ever returned from, to bring his beloved back to the world of the living. And so, with his heart full of sorrow and determination, Orpheus set out on the perilous journey to the underworld. His destination was the realm of Hades, where the souls of the dead resided for all eternity. The path to the underworld was treacherous, filled with dangers that no mortal should ever face. Yet Orpheus was undeterred. He carried with him his lyre, the instrument that had made him famous throughout the world, and he placed all his hope in the power of his music to help him succeed. When Orpheus reached the gates of the underworld, he encountered Cerberus, the fearsome three-headed dog who guarded the realm of the dead. No one could pass without Cerberus's permission, and his growls were enough to strike fear into the hearts of the bravest warriors. But Orpheus did not fight. Instead, he began to strum his lyre, playing a melody so hauntingly beautiful that even Cerberus, the most fearsome of creatures, was calmed. The great dog lay down, lulled by the music, and allowed Orpheus to pass unharmed. Next, Orpheus came to the river Styx, the dark and foreboding water that separated the world of the living from the world of the dead. Charon, the ferryman who charged dead souls to cross the river, stood at the edge of the water, ready to deny Orpheus passage. But as Orpheus played, the music moved Charon to pity. For the first time, the ferryman allowed a mortal to cross the river without payment, ferrying Orpheus across to the other side. At last, Orpheus reached the palace of Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld. The halls of the palace were cold and filled with shadows, but Orpheus did not hesitate. He stood before the rulers of the dead and began to sing. His voice rose with the music of his lyre, and he sang of his love for Eurydice, of the life they had planned to share, and of the terrible grief that had overtaken him when she was stolen away too soon. He reminded Hades and Persephone that death would claim Eurydice for all eternity in due time, as it did for all living creatures. But couldn't they, the rulers of the underworld, show mercy and grant her just a few more years on earth? Surely, after all the eternity that awaited her, a few more fleeting years above ground was not too much to ask. The song was so poignant, so filled with raw emotion, that even the most hardened hearts in the underworld were touched. For a brief moment, all of hell stood still. Sisyphus, the condemned soul eternally forced to push a boulder up a hill, paused in his endless labor, Tantalus, who was doomed to reach for food and drink that would forever elude him, stopped in his ceaseless torment. Even the Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, who took pleasure in punishing those who had wronged others, wept tears of sorrow as they listened to Orpheus's plea. Hades and Persephone, moved by the power of Orpheus's music and the depth of his love, agreed to grant his request. They would allow Eurydice to return to the world of the living. However, there was one condition. As Orpheus led Eurydice back to the surface, he must not turn around to look at her. If he did, even for a moment, she would be lost to him forever, condemned to remain in the underworld for all eternity. With his heart filled with hope, Orpheus began the long and arduous climb out of the underworld, his beloved Eurydice following behind him. But as they ascended, doubt began to creep into his mind. He heard nothing from behind him, no footsteps, no whisper of her presence. What if Hades had tricked him? What if Eurydice was not really there? The uncertainty gnawed at him, growing stronger with each step. Finally, just as Orpheus reached the threshold of the underworld, where the light of day shone brightly before him, he could bear it no longer. Overcome by fear and longing, he turned around. In that instant, he saw Eurydice's face for one brief, heartbreaking moment before she was pulled back into the shadows, vanishing forever. Orpheus had broken the one rule, and now he was doomed to live without her for the rest of his days. Devastated, Orpheus tried to return to the underworld, but the gates were closed to him. No longer allowed to enter, he was left to wander the world alone, his heart shattered beyond repair. He swore never to love another woman again, and he kept his promise. Instead, he sat in a grove of trees and poured his grief into his music, singing songs of lovers, both mortal and divine. He sang of Ganymede, the beautiful boy whom Zeus had taken to be cupbearer to the gods. He sang of Myrrha, whose forbidden love for her father led to a tragic fate. He sang of Pygmalion, who sculpted his ideal woman out of ivory and prayed to Venus until she came to life. And he sang of Venus herself, whose beloved Adonis was killed by a wild boar. Through his music, Orpheus channeled the pain and joy of love, capturing the hearts of all who listened. Yet not everyone was satisfied with poetry alone. A group of wild women known as the Maenads, followers of Dionysus, became furious when they realized that Orpheus would never love them as he had loved Eurydice. Driven to madness by their jealousy, they tore Orpheus apart, silencing his music forever. The world mourned the loss of Orpheus and Eurydice, two souls whose love had transcended even death. The birds, nature's singers, wept for Orpheus, as did the rivers that had once babbled along to his songs. But while the world grieved, Orpheus finally found peace. In death, he was reunited with Eurydice in the underworld, where they could never be parted again. There, along the banks of the river Styx, they walk together for all eternity. Sometimes they stroll side by side, sometimes Eurydice walks ahead, and sometimes Orpheus takes the lead, turning to look back at her as often as he likes, free at last from the rules that once kept them apart. Orpheus and Eurydice's wedding day was filled with joy, a celebration seemingly blessed by the gods. Orpheus, renowned as a master of music, had the power to charm beasts and move even the hearts of gods, while Eurydice, a beautiful nymph, was his perfect match. Their love was boundless, and those present felt privileged to witness such a union. However, fate had different plans. As the two celebrated, tragedy struck. A serpent bit Eurydice, and she died, leaving Orpheus heartbroken and inconsolable. Unable to bear life without her, Orpheus resolved to descend into the underworld, determined to bring Eurydice back. With only his lyre and his love to guide him, he embarked on the perilous journey. At the gates of the underworld, his music soothed the fearsome Cerberus, and Charon, moved by the beauty of his song, ferried him across the river Styx. In the cold, shadow-filled palace of Hades and Persephone, Orpheus played a song so heart-wrenching that it softened the hearts of even the most unfeeling souls in the underworld. Touched by his love and sorrow, Hades and Persephone agreed to let Eurydice return on one condition. Orpheus must not look back at her until they reached the world of the living. As they ascended, doubt plagued him. Just before reaching daylight, Orpheus turned, breaking the rule and losing Eurydice forever. Grief-stricken, Orpheus poured his soul into his music, singing of love and loss, until the Maenads, in their jealousy, silenced him. His spirit joined Eurydice's, finally finding peace as they walked together forever along the banks of the Styx, free from the rules that once tore them apart. The tragic story of Orpheus and Eurydice teaches us about the power of love, the pain of loss, and the consequences of doubt. Orpheus's love for Eurydice was so profound that he defied death itself to bring her back. Yet, his inability to trust completely ultimately cost him what he desired most. His moment of doubt reminds us that sometimes our fears can lead us astray, even when we are so close to achieving our deepest dreams. The myth also speaks to the resilience of love. Though Orpheus lost Eurydice in life, his dedication endured, eventually reuniting them in the afterlife. Their story illustrates that love can transcend even the greatest obstacles, but that trust is essential on the path to that love. In our own lives, trusting in those we love and remaining steadfast in our choices can prevent heartbreak and lead us to fulfillment. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which myth you'd love to see next on Wonders of Myth.